Welcome back to the Martha Zoller Show. We're talking now with Major Libby Weiss from the IDF. You are retired, right, Libby?
Yes, yes. I, like so many Israelis, was called up for reserve duty right after the attacks of October 7th, and I have been in reserve duty since October 8th, so for quite a bit of time.
So first of all, I always like to ask people, where were they on October 7th, and what was that day like for them?
Well, I remember October 7th as if it was yesterday. I live in Tel Aviv, and suddenly at around 6:15 in the morning, I hear sirens, which unfortunately is not something completely unusual when you live in Israel. But it did feel a little bit different. And just to explain to your listeners, these sirens are indicating incoming rocket fire that is being fired. So in Tel Aviv, I have about 90 seconds to run to the shelter in my building. So my husband and I, we run out of our apartment. We run to the shelter with the rest of our building. We sit in the shelter. We wait for about 10 minutes until we get the all clear that we're able to safely leave. And then suddenly I start to see news coming in, sort of push notifications on my phone, and I turn on the TV, and really what I saw in front of me, like all Israelis on that morning, was just something that we had never experienced before, and a horror, a true sense of fear, fear that we were being attacked, that something unusual was happening, and I was already in touch with the military around midday that day, and the next morning at 7 in the morning, I was back in uniform and reporting for duty.
So in 2014, there was another war with Hamas that was going on, and you were in the military at that time, as I understand it, and you had the experience of being able to see, as well as show others, these tunnels that Hamas has underneath the ground. And I've always said, Gaza could have been Singapore. Gaza could have been, this amazing thing that made a lot of money for everybody and created a great lifestyle. But instead, Hamas has turned Gaza into a war zone. And the only people to blame are Hamas for that, and the Palestinians that are collaborating with them on this. I don't believe that all the Palestinians are without fault, and I'm not asking you to comment on that, but tell us a little bit about the story of you becoming this person that takes people through these tunnels.
Well, yeah, my first encounter really with Hamas's terror tunnels, as you said, was in 2014, and I found myself bringing mainly reporters and diplomats and groups from abroad, really to see those tunnels up close and to get a better idea of the kind of threat that we were facing. And I remember, before entering the first Hamas tunnel for the first time, in my mind, I had an idea of sort of what a tunnel might look like. And in all fairness, I maybe thought that it was something kind of rudimentary, something that a few people were digging, not really something that necessarily was too organized or a real threat. And then I walked into the tunnel, and it completely changed my perspective. And suddenly I was standing in a tunnel that was miles long. It crossed from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory. And I was just struck by the level of engineering that I saw in this tunnel. And this was back in 2014. And I remember that this was a tunnel that was made with cement. And you can imagine that was cement that was going into the Gaza Strip that should have been used for civilian purposes, for building homes and schools and businesses, and for developing the Gaza Strip, as you said, into something for its civilians. And instead, I just found myself in a tunnel where the walls were all perfectly, identically created blocks of cement. There was a roof essentially to the tunnel. There were tracks on the bottom to move supplies in and out. And then I was just struck by the tunnels, and the tunnels that we see now that our forces are finding in the Gaza Strip, that they're destroying, and really having to go, in some cases, home by home, door to door, to find this tunnel network under the Gaza Strip, are a completely different grade of what we saw back in 2014. And these are tunnels that have electricity, heating, air conditioning. It's an entire network. So you can imagine it's not a single tunnel, but almost a web of tunnels in which there are supplies there for for the terrorists who are there to be underground for an extended amount of time. Just the level of sophistication is something that I think is hard to imagine unless you see it. And it's so important for people to be able to see it so they understand what we mean when we're saying that we're fighting a terror organization that is completely committed to our destruction, that is using the supplies that should be going to the civilians in the Gaza Strip for terror purposes, and an enemy that has no regard for the civilians. And we see this because they're digging these tunnels deep under the civilian communities in the Gaza Strip. And once I think you see it, it has a really, really strong impact. And I think it provides an important perspective.
Why do you think it is that it seems like Israel gets asked things that no one else gets asked? Okay, you were attacked on October 7th. You have responded in a way that I'm not even going to use the word proportional, because when you decide to go to war, what you have to have is a goal in mind at the end. And I think the goal in mind here is victory and to end Hamas. That's what the goal is. And there's a reason for that. And it seems like, only Israel is being asked to change what they're doing. What I usually say to people that ask this is I say, well, then why aren't you saying free the hostages and have Hamas to surrender? Why is it always Israel needs to be ceasefire? Is that the way it's always been, or are we just noticing it more now?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And I think some of it goes beyond the scope of what I would be able to talk about from the military's perspective. But what I can say from our perspective is that we ourselves, as the IDF, hold ourselves to a very, very high standard. And that's important. It's part of our values. It's part of the professionalism with which we operate. And it's part of the responsibility that we have as military of a democratic country. And we hold ourselves to high standards. And we're proud to do so. And as you mentioned, we take extraordinary measures to minimize the impact on civilians in the Gaza Strip, to minimize the impact on them, and to operate at the highest level of professionalism. And we are operating in a really complicated battlefield. And you can imagine it's probably the most complex urban warfare environment in the world. And we're doing this against an enemy that intentionally is making it as complicated as possible, and that is intentionally threatening its own civilians. And almost in a bizarre way, we have become the only party in this conflict that has any interest in minimizing the impact on civilians in the Gaza Strip. So we hold ourselves to a very, very high standard. And it's unfortunate, I think, and how low the standards are on Hamas. And I think you're absolutely right, which is that first and foremost, the call here should be on Hamas to release the hostages. There are 134 hostages who are still being held. Men, women, children. Kfir Bibas, who celebrated his 1-year birthday in Hamas captivity. I don't see how there can be any discussion without calling for an immediate release of all of the hostages, and for Hamas to surrender, for Hamas to put down their weapons, to no longer be committed to destroying us. And I think until they're going to do that, and who knows if that will ever happen, certainly the IDF has to dismantle Hamas, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they never do what they did on October 7th again. And it seems that this is something that any country would do anywhere in the world in any other scenario.
So what is your job now? You were called back up October 8th. What is the kind of work that you're doing now for the IDF?
Well, I've been working really, really closely with reporters, with the press, with diplomats, with other individuals to really be a conduit between the military and the press to make sure that I'm able to engage and that the IDF is able to engage with all kinds of reporters from all places, from all kinds of groups that want to come, for, again, a wide variety of different people, and really to provide as much information and clarity as we can. And it's something that is important to us. We, again, as I've said, we're the military of a democracy, and being able to provide information that's accurate and clear is absolutely necessary. And that's really what I've been doing, and I'm honored and proud to do it.
I've gotten a number of push notifications today about activities that are going on in southern Gaza, mainly from the Hamas side. I mean, the sources that are being quoted are from the Hamas side. That, what is it called? The information ministry or whatever it is that they call themselves. So what is the process, if you can say, like once IDF, I mean, because you guys are very friendly with the press, and what I mean is you're open and you're honest and you talk about things to the extent that you can. What's the process that y'all go through before you release information?
Well, the most important is that anything that we say needs to be verified and vetted, and we take that very, very seriously. And we've seen so many examples in this conflict where the Hamas Ministry of Health is very, very quick to release information that under no circumstances, under any normal circumstances, would they be able to have that kind of information vetted so quickly. And that's not the process under which we operate. We need to be very clear, and we need to go up the chain of command to be sure that information we're providing to the public is accurate. And if we understand that for whatever reason there was information that came out that was not accurate, we need to take responsibility for that, and to be able to say that was a mistake. We need to correct what we're saying, and it's something that we take very, very seriously. And that trust and that public trust in dealing with the press is really important. It's the cornerstone of the work that I do and the work that my colleagues do. And we have to vet our information. And I think that's a huge difference between us and the standard that we have on ourselves and a terrorist organization. Nobody is pushing a terrorist organization to vet their information. Nobody is holding them to any kind of standard when they obviously lie. And we've seen this countless times in the past and in past conflicts. And they're not held responsible for any kind of false information or fake news that they put out. But we hold ourselves to a higher standard, and I'm proud to do that.
So, and finally, and we're talking to Major Libby Weiss from the IDF. Finally, what do you want people to know 132 days out? What is the thing that's most important for you to have people understand?
I'm so glad that you're asking that, Martha. For me, this week in particular, we had a kind of an almost a small light, or a large light, even in kind of a period of a lot of darkness, and that was the rescue, the IDF rescue of two of the hostages, Fernando Marman, who was 61 years old, and Louis Har, who was 70 years old. These were two men who were taken hostage from a kibbutz in the south, were held in horrific conditions for so long, since October 7th. And the IDF was able to release them this week. And it just an incredible mission. And I think the entire country, myself included, when we saw the footage of their release, when we saw just the relief that they felt in being with the IDF and being with IDF soldiers, and seeing the images of them hug their families in the hospital, it for me was such a clear representation of what it is that we are doing. And that is to say that on October 7th, more than 240 people were taken hostage. They were pulled out of their beds in some cases. They were dragged from their homes. They were dragged from the streets. And they were taken. And our responsibility is to make sure that every single one of them returns. And I think seeing Fernando and Luis this week come home, seeing them reunite with their families, was the clearest reminder of why we are doing this. And I imagine anywhere else in the world, people would expect the same thing from their militaries. They would expect the same thing from their country. And this is why we are doing this. This was not a war that we started. I think that everybody here would have been very happy to continue living as we were living on October 6th. But our world changed, and we need to make sure that we are going to be victorious. We need to make sure that Israelis can sleep in their beds at night, and we need to do everything to bring back our hostages. And that is exactly what we will do until the very last person.
Major Libby Weiss, thank you for being with me today.
Of course. Thank you, Martha.